They thought they had banished us forever. But now, finally, we have returned.
Hello and welcome to another Writer's Showcase. Sorry if I've been taking a while. Weird stuff has been happening, to say the least, with my sleep schedule. I hate it a lot. Overnight stockings is a bit of a rough job, but what can you do? Anyway, allow me to bring in my fabulous guests. First off, let's bring on aspiring writer.
I don't understand that clip.
I just barely made it and I have to use it.
I'm back, folks.
And welcome back, Carl Saylor.
Hello again. I promise I won't be taking over this stream like I did a while back. Probably.
Press X to doubt.
Yes.
Well, my internet is good, at least somewhat. So, and, got a guest, iMoth. Always a pleasure.
Oh, yes. Very good.
Nice.
And what else is there? Anything else? Oh, yes. Balerion will be coming on later, yes?
Yes, he will be. That is the current plan.
All right.
So, how will we do this? Carl, would you be willing to read a Moth's thing first, and then aspiring, and then
and then me again.
Then you again, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then either me or Balerion will finish, and then hopefully we'll be done about 4-ish.
Mm-hmm. Sounds about right. I can do that. All right. So, reading for Mothmaster, the Master of Mantises. This is a very short piece, but still worthwhile. Sorg the Fireborn. The great lands saw nothing more than war ahead once the Forge King fell. It was as though Shalazoth itself cried out for its master as the nights grew colder. Magnarig arrived at Yaulasir's sanctum, the home of his brood. The golden queen glared at the dried roots, a stick with holy fire in her hand, and her general spoke. "My queen, if you do this, all of Yowlin shall have your head." Magnarig's eyes could not stop staring at the light in her hands. "So be it," she hissed. "I'll make sure there are no heirs to his throne, and by my will no mercy nor peace shall be given." General Whitewing's eyes widened as his queen lowered the torch to the tree's dying roots and watched as the fire began to spread. "Do you realize what you have done? You..." Whitewing looked down in horror, the stench of smoke and burning flesh all around her. The caterpillars, the moths, all of them. "You are a fool!" Whitewing started to take out her blade. "And I will take no part in this." Magnarig scoffed, and her golden sword touched the general's neck fur. "You defy me, and you will join your sister in the pits of hell." Whitewing's hand trembled. Her fur was stiff in anger and fear. She didn't expect her superior to commit such an atrocity, knowing full well that Adath will have no mercy on her. The moth slowly backed away from the sword tip that appeared to push deeper into her neck. She looked at the tree that began to fill with agonizing screams. If you believe that you are free from the consequences, I assure you that you are not, and never will be, she growled. If there are any survivors, I want them sent straight into the darkest of stars. Magna Rig turned to the raging fire and eyed the guards and mothers who were trying to protect their young. If I cannot have the Iron King's throne, then I will make sure no heir can take it. That is all. As I said, it was a relatively small piece.
Nice. It's interesting. It's very interesting. I'm intrigued to see what ramifications it has later. But yeah, it's like you're definitely like getting some local drama there. It's very
Yes. This is clearly something that is not common, even among this land of warrior moths. Yeah. So there'll be definitely some consequences from this.
alrighty. Aspiring writer, it is your turn.
Alrighty then, let me pull it up. Does anyone remember what happened last time, or do I need to do a little summary-ish?
Should probably remind us. It's been a while, I think.
Okay, our main character, Triple, has been with her squad for like a few weeks now. The last chapter, she was with Will, which is basically her mentor. They were talking, and the chapter ends with an alert going out throughout the ship. They're about to start the operation that's been hinted throughout the past few chapters. All right. Hopefully that's enough to remind you, because I'm not good at summarizing.
Fair enough.
The lower level of the ship was abuzz with activity. Carol and Jeffrey were piloting the freighter, the door to the cockpit open for all to see and hear. Nick was checking whatever was in the crates in the cargo bay, Serial reading out the manifest for him. Will pulled Triple into the medical bay, where Uriel was trying to pull out a section of the wall, using a small tool with a flat edge for leverage. Beside her were the armbands she had taken, as well as what looked like every plasma arm on the ship. Uriel managed to pry off the section with a metallic screech and set it aside, revealing some of the interior of the ship. Will pushed Triple a little bit closer so she could have a better look, and as Triel put her hand on what looked like a large pipe, she looked pointedly at Triple. Uriel lifted the top of the pipe off, keeping her eyes on Triple as she did so. After a moment, Uriel frowned, looking unsatisfied, and then started putting the armbands and plasma arms inside the pipe. Triple heard a slight chuckle, and she looked up to see Will smirking. He noticed her expression and leaned down to whisper. She was expecting you to have a reaction to what you just did, as when most raw recruits see that, they act like a crawl out in space, huddling against a corner. You, however, have no idea what that is, so you barely made a peep. And it is... Will gave her a devious smile. One of the ship's plasma cannon storage casings. An empty one, modified so we can store things inside. It comes at the cost of having one of our plasma cannons unusable, but it is necessary. Why? Triple asked, giving him an inquisitive look. To go through customs, he said, with a tone that implied he thought that was obvious. What customs? Will grabbed her arm lightly and pulled her into the cockpit. Those customs. Through the viewport, Triple could see their destination. One of the planets of the Yamar star system. She didn't know which one. Will hadn't decided to privy her to that information, but following planet naming conventions, it would share the same name as its star system, followed by its position in the planetary system, unless it was one of the more populated or prominent worlds of that system, where it would then earn the distinction of prime, major, or minor of that system. Judging by the number of lights on the dark side of the planet that indicated cities, it probably had received one of those honors. On the light side of the planet, a mix of greens and reds, only broken by a few sporadic light gray dots. The larger cities of the planet. It was an impressive sight, only somewhat taken away by what was surrounding the planet, and what Will had probably wanted to show her. Orbiting the planet, encompassing it, was a planetary shield, something that Will had said every planet with a sizable population had at least one of. At least nowadays, if she remembered him exactly, indicating that these were probably not as common before or in the first few centuries of the Ascending Territory. The shield looked like 3 large rings put together, one following the equator of the planet and the other 2 running up to meet at the poles. Where the rings would have met, it instead curved to form large circles, where she could see all the ships funneling in and out of. The shield itself was barely visible. The only indication it existed was the edges, and even those only as if it was in front of if it was in front of space and not the planet, almost like a bubble. As they neared the circle at the upper pole of the planet, Carol referred to it as the northern spaceport, she could see weapon placements throughout the framework of the planetary shield, facing away from the planet. In the back of her mind, she wondered if those weapon placements had ever been pointed downward. Will tapped her shoulder and indicated for her to follow him out of the cockpit. Triple started to, but paused to look back at Carol. Her plasma arm and holster were gone, likely storing that pipe with the others. Were plasma arms illegal? She continued to follow Will out of the cockpit, where Uriel, Serial, and Nick were all waiting. Uriel and Serial still had their armor and blades, and Nick was handling some other weapon with a larger muscle than a plasma arm, big enough to fit one of her fingers, and a bit clunkier in design. She would have thought if it was a plasma arm, if not for the fact they had confiscated and stored them all. Nick noticed her looking and frowned. What? You still mad about the comment I made? Triple shook her head. What's that you're holding? It looks like a plasma arm, but it's different. She felt everyone's eyes turn toward her. Yeah, it isn't, Nick confirmed awkwardly. It's a firearm. Early predecessor to plasma arms. They shoot high-speed projectiles rather than plasma. Surprised you could tell the difference. Isn't this the first one you've seen? She nodded, a little miffed at how surprised everyone was at recognizing the difference. I noticed the muzzle was larger, so I guessed it was something else. Nick raised an eyebrow at Will. You weren't kidding about her being perceptive. But why are you using firearms if plasma arms are better? Triple asked, confused. Nick looked to Will expectantly, who started to explain. Most plasma arms aren't legal, and those that are require you to get a license to carry and use one. Which we don't have, Nick added in, because none of us respectable folk have several years to spare on paperwork. Or a spotless record, Uriel said with mock innocence, and Serial let out a chuckle, smiling. Nick gave Uriel a sour look. Or that, he admitted begrudgingly, pushing himself onto one of the crates to sulk. The sources, however, Will continued, made firearms easily accessible for the public to purchase. The main reasons being bullet wounds are easier to heal than plasma burns, they carry less ammunition than plasma arms, and less likely to explode. Triple turned to Will sharply. Explode? Plasma packs can explode if they're broken or mishandled, Nick answered, cutting Will off before he could. Some plasma packs are even made to double as explosives you can throw. The small plasma arms that Uriel and Carol carry, those are enough to kill everyone in this cargo bay. And those are the small ones. Imagine what the ship plasma storages could do. Triple's face paled, and Uriel burst out laughing, finally being able to enjoy her terrified expression. All right, enough of that, Jeffrey yelled from the cockpit. We're about to land for inspection, so get your act together. Will gave him a respectful nod, probably a rare sight for Jeffrey, and pulled her aside to a corner. Triple felt the ship land, the dump reverberating through her, and the ramp started to lower. Outside was a team of around a dozen, consisting of humans, Maquis, and fillies. They wore a uniform underneath light vests that looked a little too thick to not be armor, but they weren't metal like the golden ones or what Uriel and Serial wore. All carried plasma arms, though only a few carried rifles at the ready, the others having sidearms in their holsters. All wore a metal cap with a visor that hid their eyes, and many held a device that looked like a small flat square with a handle. They waited until Carol came out to greet them, where then all except one, who held a screen, flooded into the ship, sticking their square devices out in front of them. They're using scanners as they search the ship, Will whispered to her. The inspectors in these spaceports are allowed to be very thorough. What's to stop them from detecting... One of the inspectors shot them a glance. Triple could tell by how she tilted her head toward them, before going back to using the sensor on one of their crates. The plasma cannon storage casing is too thick for their scanner to penetrate, and the internal sensor for that storage has been modified to show it as half full, so they won't risk trying to open it. One of the inspectors wasn't using his sensor, instead giving everything a cursory glance before leaving. What's he doing? Will looked at who she was referring to. Philly's eyes can see somewhat into the infrared spectrum, so he's just checking for any anomalies. The sensor should be able to see anything he can, but they like to check regardless. The inspector scanning the crates glanced at them, and Triple got the impression of her eyes narrowing. Is it safe to whisper like this, she asked, suddenly apprehensive. With Will leaning down so he can whisper to her, they weren't exactly inconspicuous. She felt Will scoff in her ear, causing her to grimace. That wasn't a pleasant sensation. No more suspicious than anyone else. They have to deal with people whispering behind their backs all the time. And considering how young and naive you look, I have plenty of reason to be whispering to you. She gave a slight nod, still not entirely convinced. The inspector was definitely getting suspicious of what they were saying, sidling closer up to them as she scanned at her crates. Will noticed and glared at her until she moved away. Your warning might have some credence, Will admitted. That one is a bit more paranoid than the others. His eyes thinned as he kept watching her. And seemingly perspective. Not a good combination. Perceptive? She's shooting glances at Uriel and Serial, specifically their knives. Blades are fine to carry, and those who can't afford firearms will have one, but it's normally hosts that use them. With them having armor, it's suspicious for them not to have a firearm. Fortunately, we only have the one. Maybe she'll just assume they're hosts then, she pointed out. Is there any problem there? Will shook his head slightly. They can check their file and see there aren't. That'll raise an eyebrow, but hopefully it won't be enough to justify any further action. An inspector climbed down from the upper level. Triple hadn't noticed them going up there, and gave a thumbs up to his buddies. Rooms are clear. They checked our rooms, she rasped. They check everything, Will ridiculed her. We wouldn't sacrifice one of the ship's cannons if there was a better option. The threat of the revolutionaries, a squad of soldiers blending into society, has been more than enough to justify a thorough search of all starships entering a planet. The inspector started trickling down, giving reports to their superior, the one who waited outside with Carol. The head inspector and Carol had spoken shortly after landing, but otherwise had said nothing to each other. Will nudged her closer toward them so she could eavesdrop, and Triple couldn't help but smile at Will's effort to have her learn from the operation. Crates are empty, Triple heard the head inspector say, getting right in the middle of her question. Why is that? Our current employer may need more space to store his belongings. If not, extra storage space can never hurt, Carol shrugged. The inspector nodded, drawing a look towards Serial and Uriel. She looked like she was going to ask something, but then thought better of it. Okay, everything seems to check out, except for one thing. The girl. Feeling the hair on her neck stand up, Triple forced herself not to react. She didn't want to give away that she was overhearing. What about her? Carol asked calmly. There is no file on her in the Ascending Territory Registry. Who is she? The inspector's rifle took a step closer, and Triple realized with a fright they had surrounded Carol. They were close to just dragging her away. Before Carol could answer, Jeffrey thundered past Triple, standing at his full domineering height with a stormy expression. He put an arm on Carol's shoulder. "I'll take it from here," he told her. Carol nodded and went back into the ship, looking relieved. Turning to the inspector, Jeffrey smiled immediately, his demeanor drastically changing to be less intimidating. "Sorry, I was indisposed." The inspector's expression didn't alter from the exchange. "Are you the owner of this vessel?" "No, technically Carol owns it, but I run her operation, so if you need to ask any questions, I'm the best person for it." "Fine. The girl. Who is she?" "She is a recent acquisition from the Sullen system. An orphan. We decided to take her in and mentor her." "Why isn't she in the registry?" she asked dryly. Jeffrey shrugged innocently. "We found her on an outpost at Sullen 6. They probably missed her." At the mention of Sullen 6, the inspector's lip curled. "Yeah, registry department has trouble there. Why haven't you taken her to be registered?" "As I said, she is a recent acquisition. This would be our first opportunity to do so." Giving Triple a once-over, the inspector's expression grew troubled. "She doesn't look like she's been treated well," the inspector noted, her voice stiff. The comment made Triple cock her head. She was concerned about her well-being, but she served the Ascending Territory. The sources. Why did she care about one random girl? Jeffrey bristled at the implication, his expression indignant. "If you're referring to the scars, let me assure you that was not our doing. She had those when we found her." "How do you suppose she came to have them then?" "Before we found her, she was working with a group that hunted one of the many flying rodents that plague the planet. The Yamites, I believe. Vicious those pests are." Pursing her lips, the inspectors crossed her arms as she thought about what Jeffrey told her. Finally, she turned to Triple and pointed to her. "You, come here for a moment." Triple narrowed her eyes as she approached the inspector, who had moved a short distance away from Jeffrey, a guard moving in between the two. The inspector turned her away from Jeffrey, eyeing him. "Are they treating you well?" she asked softly. Triple started. "Yeah, they are." She had been expecting the inspector to question her, not confirm with her. "Do you want to stay with them? Truly?" Triple tried sensing the inspector's emotions, trying to feel for any malevolence from her, but all she sensed was sincere concern. Concern for her, someone she barely knew. "Yes, I do," she affirmed. "Not like I have any other option." Will had made clear that any attempt at a normal life wouldn't last long. Triple hesitated for a moment before adding, "Why do you care?" The inspector's brow rose a notch. "It's my job to care." She turned back to Jeffrey, who was waiting patiently, pulling the sides of his jacket down. "I expect you to get her registered before you can leave. Can I trust you to do that?" Jeffrey inclined his head to her. "Of course, I had been planning to." The inspector nodded. "I'll be marking you and your crew just in case, with a note to remove it if she is on file." Curtly nodding, Jeffrey guided Triple back into the ship, where she took her place beside Will again. The ramp slowly rose, and when it closed, Jeffrey let out a sigh of relief. "Difficult?" Will prodded. His voice wasn't antagonizing, so he was genuinely interested. Will wasn't the type to hide when he was provoking someone. Jeffrey shrugged. "The inspector was definitely apprehensive, but the cover story I gave to her was solid. Don't know if I needed to alter her emotions, but it definitely didn't hurt." He turned to Ural and Serial. "Remind me to acquisition some firearms for you two. Last time I want to take a chance like that." Jeffrey started toward the cockpit, but Triple spoke up, raising a hand. What was that about us being marked if we don't register me?" He ignored her, and Triple scowled, turning to Will. "Well?" she demanded. Will put an arm around her. "Inspectors mark those who they find suspicious, leaving a note on what to look out for. For now, it's just insurance that we try and get you registered into the system. After this operation, that mark will reveal us as revolutionaries." Her eyes widened. "How can you say that so calmly?" Will shook his head. "Triple, this operation will require us to make a haste escape from the planet, through the shield. They'll figure out our part in the raid. There's no way around it." "And you're okay with that?" she asked incredulously. Will bit the inside of his lip. Let's just say it won't matter for Mark for a long time. She didn't get to ask a chance what he meant before Nick tossed something to Will, who caught it lazily. It was a small plasma arm. Triple's eyes darted to Nick, and she saw he was holding a plasma rifle. Behind him, Ural and Tyrrell are fixing the holsters for their plasma arms. Get one for her, Will ordered, nodding to Triple. Nick looked to Jeffrey for confirmation, and while she couldn't see Jeffrey where she was standing, Nick did go and get her a plasma arm. Tossing it to her, she felt a spike of panic as she caught it, remembering what Nick said about plasma arms exploding. They landed not long after, the ramp lowering to reveal they were somewhere different than they were previously. She looked to Will questioningly, who understood her confusion without her saying anything. We were at one of the 6 spaceports of the planetary shield, the 6 circles you saw back there. The inspector searched all ships before giving us permission to descend to the planet. Triple nodded and turned her attention to the others. Uriel, Cyril, and Nick were doing a check on all their gear, getting ready to head out. Jeffrey strolled into the room, eyeing everyone individually before calling for everyone's attention. The other squads are in position. You have your orders, but I want to remind you that we aren't here for confrontation. When Mark arrives, be ready to disengage and retreat back here. Nick, I want you to come back here and guard the ship once we have control of the factory. And Uriel, you have your special assignment. I'll be staying here to coordinate. All clear? Everyone nodded and he ordered them out. Triple expected them to charge out of the freighter, but they simply strolled out, taking their time. Triple slid down the ramp to see they were in some kind of space dock. Inside a circular area with no ceiling above them to hide the night sky. Several ships surrounded them in marked spaces, though there was nobody around. Triple, Will called out. Triple turned around, her eyebrow raised. Will pointed at her plasma arm. You're going to need to know how to fire that. Repeat what I do. He then walked through aiming and firing the plasma arm. She didn't actually fire the gun. Will told her that despite it being only a Redan, the weakest of the plasma arms, it could still do a lot of damage. He also showed her how to remove the plasma pack, a tiny rectangular case which only held enough plasma to cause an explosion large enough to kill both her and Will. She held it gingerly, afraid to even move it too quickly. Sliding it back in the plasma arm with an audible click, she sat next to Will, who had taken a spot at the bottom of the ramp, lying down. Aren't we supposed to be standing guard? Grinning, Will let out a huff. No point in doing so right now, not until they commence the raid. Better to act relaxed in case anyone strolls by. All the ships here are from other squads, but you never know when a guard patrol civilian might decide to pop in. She nodded, starting to fidget with her fingers. It felt odd sitting there when she knew something big was happening not that far away. The inspector, she finally said into the silence. She was concerned about me. She has no idea who I am, yet she cared to ask if I wanted to stay with you. No response. She checked to see if Will had fallen asleep like that one other time, but his eyes were open and looking at her. I didn't expect that from her, she continued. A bit silly, but I expected something harsher than what I received. More suspicion. Seconds passed as she waited for Will to respond. Triple reached out to sense of his emotions, only to again be blocked by something. She continued to wait, and finally Will spoke. The royal guard in charge of watching you back at Wasin. What do you think of them? Her mouth twisted at the reminder of the golden ones. They were terrible. She recalled some of her nightmares. Brutal. I expected the inspectors to be more like them. Will nodded solemnly. They saved your life. Triple ground her jaw as she lifted her fist and brought it down on Will's stomach. The blow made him flinch up, a look of surprise on his face. Don't joke about that, she yelled. Triple, I'm not joking. Without them, you wouldn't be alive. His eyes bore into her, betraying no humor behind his expression. They kept me in that state for all my life, she cried out, standing up. They used to threaten to shoot me to keep me in line. Didn't care about whether I lived or died. A sigh escaping his lips, Will shook his head. Triple, despite your enhanced memory, your recollection of events can be far from perfect. They did keep you in a mindless state, yes, but the other stuff isn't in their profile. They're there to make sure you stay in that state and nothing more. What you're remembering is a villain you've created in your head. She grit her teeth harder, hands clutched in the fists. I remember them shooting at me. Why else would they have guns? in case the revolutionaries ever came along like on the day we freed you, Will said dryly. Do you remember ever stepping out of line? Ever? Triple paused. Will took her silence as an answer, nodding. They intimidated you, and so when you think back, you remember cruelty where there was none. But how did they save me, she countered. Not beating me doesn't exactly constitute a rescue. We have determined that you were likely sent there as a baby. How do you think you survived on Wasin at that age? Triple took a sharp intake of breath through her nose. Maybe I was sent there at an older age instead. Then why do you, a potent mind host, have no recollection of that time? Will confronted her. Born offspring can survive in an environment as hostile as Wasin's, but not you. You would have been taken care for until your adolescent years. Otherwise, you would have died, even with your shape-shifting abilities. If you had been sent there at that age, you should be able to recall some of your later childhood. It's not so late that you can't remember. Will shook his head. No, you were sent as a baby, and they kept you in that state from all the way back then. That's why you have no memories of that time. They took care of you until you were old enough to have a chance. They do the same to any children accidentally born from the prisoners there. Triple dimly noticed she was shaking. Why are you telling me this? To make a point. Even the people you thought of as heartless scumbags had compassion in them. They were still willing to put a child through all the plan of a heat and death, so they weren't great, but they weren't going to send you there just to die, without a fighting chance. Don't make the mistake of putting everyone who works for the ascending territory in a box, Will warned, his eyes flaring. It might make it easier to cope, but don't blind yourself that the people you're going to kill are people. People with reasons for what they're doing, many of them justified. Triple slowly sunk down, feeling numb from the revelation. Should it comfort her to know the monsters who trapped her mind had some good in them? That they were part of the reason she was alive? No, what they did shouldn't change how she felt about them. She owed them nothing. Hatred for them was completely warranted, and her feelings toward them didn't change, but they did diminish slightly. But would she be so sure about anyone else who worked for the Ascending Territory? The Inspector genuinely cared about her. Would she have tried to kill her if she knew about Triple's nature as a triple host? Would that one fact be enough for them to turn from benevolent to belligerent? How do you handle it? She said softly. Knowing those you oppose can be justified. How do you shoot them down in the moment, acknowledging that? Will stood up, hands in his pockets. His eyes stared ahead, a weight behind them she couldn't describe. I remember that my reasons are also justified, he said, keeping his eyes forward. And that if I don't kill them, they'll kill me. Triple bit her lip. I'm not sure if I can do that. Learn to. It's not easy, but you'll need to. I won't say that my way makes everything alright, or makes what I've done justified, but it'll give you confidence that, at least in the moment, you did what you thought was necessary. Even if you look back and find you no longer agree with what you did, at least you know at the time, you thought what you did was right. Triple swallowed, Will's words heavy on her mind. So much so she didn't notice Nick, who had returned at some point, standing next to her until he almost stepped on her. Oh, sorry, he apologized, keeping his eyes out for threats. He wore a loose cloth mask that covered the lower half of his face now. Triple glanced back, sensing that Will was behind her. Sure enough, he was there, quietly conversing with Jeffrey, a hologram between the two. Though she couldn't tell where it was emitting from. The operation is a success? She asked Nick. The scared around Nick's eyes crinkled and she guessed he was smiling. All went smoothly. We have dozens of squads for this operation, which is about 80 or so squad mates. That's the next part that we need to be prepared for. Right, the Angel. That was the main purpose of their being here. Triple fiddled with her plasma arm until Nick grabbed it out of her hand, scowling at her as he gave it back. Nick, how do you... Not now, Nick cut her off. He was looking up at the sky intently as if he could see something, but there was nothing. Raging up mentally, she got a sense he was apprehensive. Of what she didn't know. There's plenty to be anxious about. Maybe everything. Triple heard steps approaching and saw Uriel approaching them, dragging someone by the hair behind her. She didn't have a mask, but somehow her face looked blurry when Triple focused on it. Nick suddenly lifted her up by the arm. Hey, Triple exclaimed. Come. This part has to do with you. He started over to meet Uriel, and behind her, Will and Jeffrey walked over to the edge of the ramp, their expressions unreadable. She followed Nick, and they met Uriel not far from the ship, Nick staying a few paces behind Triple. Now that she was closer, Triple could see that Uriel's face had a weird fractal effect surrounding it, making it impossible to make out any details. The air was tense, as if everyone was holding their breath. Jeffrey walked over, his plasma arm out, keeping the same distance Nick was on the other side. Uriel pulled the human male's head up, revealing a bleeding forehead, a drop running down his tanned skin. He wore a tight gray shirt and baggy pants, yet seemed bare, as if something was missing. Jeffrey took out a piece of cloth and tied it on like Nick. Nick handed Triple her own to do the same. Once she had hers on, Jeffrey ordered, "Wake him." Uriel gave the man a few light smacks to wake him up. "Who is he?" Triple asked as the man started to grow conscious. "One of the guards at the weapons factory," Uriel bit out. She watched the man closely. His eyes were unfocused, still not fully awake. "He doesn't look like he's going to wake soon," Uriel observed. She turned to Jeffrey and he nodded to her. Uriel looked back at Triple and pointed at her plasma arm. "You know how to use that?" Triple nodded, frowning. "Why did she want to know that?" Uriel nodded. "Good." She held the man up higher so he was on his knees. He was still incapable of keeping himself up, so Uriel kept holding onto his hair so he didn't fall over. "Kill him."
Okay, is that it?
Yes, a bit of a long chapter, but
What a way to end it.
yeah. What do you think?
Man, it sucks being a terrorist, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit, it seems like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's definitely got some nice ambiguity in there. I like it a lot.
I am very intrigued.
Yes.
Well, we do have another guest here. Please welcome.
Glad you could join us, Count Balerion.
Count Balerion, your mic is off.
Yeah, you've auto-muted yourself.
I imagine his thing is, "Greetings, beings."
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it is Carl Saylor next.
Oh, all right then. I guess it's I guess I'm up.
Yes, time for some actual good
there you
reading.
Sorry about that. I had a mild kitchen mishap, so I wasn't able to come right away. Okay, that last thing, I like the interactions, bits of wording and phrasing here and there. Sunk should be sank, unless there's an auxiliary. That's what I'm remembering. Sorry, I've been doing things. So that's what I heard. That's what I was able to pick up. But I do like the interactions, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good dialogue. All right. So, am I up next?
Are we in Shenoland?
Yes, I believe.
Yes. Pardon me.
Holy shit. I've never seen Balerion this excited.
Yeah. Anyhow. So, as you may recall from last time, Shenna was sneaking out into the boys' dormitory, and she ran into someone who is, I guess, doing the rounds for the night, and very quickly tried to conceal herself but found out that the light source that she is holding refuses to be concealed. So, we pick up again. "Who's there?" the figure called out. Shenna's heart almost stopped. The figure with the red lantern stood by the tree in the center of the courtyard, looking about in the darkness. Shenna tried to squeeze herself further back into the tight gap between the hedge and the stone wall. She did not dare take her eyes off the watchman. Her mind was boiling over with visions of all the horrible punishments she would suffer once he caught her. "Yurik!" another voice called out. "That you?" "Haskar, you on watch tonight?" the watchman said. "I thought I heard someone out there." "Yeah, that was probably me," Haskar's voice called out as a second figure with a lantern emerged into the courtyard from the direction Shenna had come first. "Thought I saw someone coming this way. Guess I made a bit of a racket going around the hedges." "Well, it's been a while since I've run into you. How have you been keeping these days?" "Not as bad as it could be, I guess. Patrols have been slackening due to the new moon, but they'll probably start picking up again soon in a few days. Not looking forward to that, I can tell you. We cleaned out a fair few illegal magic operations last month. We'll probably see the same this time around. What about you?" "Coursework is the same as ever. But now that I'm standing in for Parnolfun lectures, the Conclave has decided to fast-track my promotion. Still making me do rounds, of course. Won't exempt me until the next course cycle, once everything's official." "And Gemma, you still seeing her?" "Not as much as I'd like to. Karna's been riding her ragged these days. Gemma says they're expanding one of the academic departments or opening up a new one or something like that." "Yeah, I feel you there. Myrna hardly has any free time these days either. Archives are keeping her real busy." From her hiding place wedged between the bushes and the wall, Shenna felt her panic slowly turn to relief, and then to boredom, and finally to frustration. Just how long were those two going to keep chattering away about the small doings of this friend or that? Why couldn't they just wrap things up and get back to their rounds? Boys would talk for hours about the most boring things. Finally, mercifully, the two watchmen ceased their gossip and parted ways. Shenna crept out of the hedge gap as soon as the red lantern light vanished, and angrily brushed a few leaves and twigs off her clothes before continuing into the boys' dormitories. Hopefully Gareth hadn't gone to sleep while waiting for her. Shenna made her way up to the second floor and found the door at the far end of the corridor marked with a single diamond-shaped dot. That, she knew, represented the number 1. Shenna backtracked down the hallway, counting and watching as the symbols wound up with the doors. 2 dots for 2, 3 for 3, 4 for 4. 5 was represented by a vertical line, and 6 through 9 by a combination of the line with the same dot pattern from 1 through 4. 10 was 2 lines, 15 3 lines, and 20 was a new looping symbol. That was the door she was looking for. Gareth's chamber. She took a deep breath and knocked softly on the door. She was in the middle of undoing the knot in her skirts when the door finally swung open. She looked up to see Gareth standing in the doorway, backlit against the chamber beyond. Like her, he had also traded in his initiate's robes for a more dignified outfit. In his case, a brown tunic and vest that offset his fiery hair quite nicely, and simple black trousers. "Glad you made it," he said, with a soft smile that Shenna couldn't help but match. "Come on inside." The room beyond was much the same as Shenna's own room. 2 beds, 2 chests, 2 tables, and a large window along the back wall. Gareth sat down on one of the beds underneath a brazier where a single red flame burned low to illuminate the chamber. "Did you have any trouble getting here?" "Not too much trouble," Shenna said, holding out the still glowing white stone. "Your gift was most helpful after all." "Clever little thing, isn't it?" Gareth said with a grin as he reached up and took the stone. Not a moment after it left Shenna's fingers, the light flickered out and twinkled into darkness. It's called a glass moon. It gives off light that can only be seen by the one who holds it. Pretty useful for sneaking around after curfew, don't you think? Gareth's eyes swept up and down, taking in Shenna's outfit. You look nice, by the way. Thank you, Shenna said, standing a little straighter. Your outfit is also... Well, how should she describe it? She couldn't be too free with her praise, lest Gareth think her a lack-witted little light skirt. But if she was too stingy, he might decide she wasn't worth pursuing. It is quite flattering. Right then. Gareth got up, opened his trunk, and began to fish around for something. So, you wanted assistance with reading, that right? Yes. Shenna glanced at the empty bed opposite the chamber. What about your roommate? Is he going to object to this? Or do you have the room to yourself? Padraig does patrol training most nights, Gareth said. As long as we're done by midnight, he'll never know. That's good, Shenna said. Now, I brought my copybook with me. I'm afraid my pen is running a bit low on charge, so if you have one of your own, that would be... Don't bother with it, Gareth said, pulling a large book out of the trunk. He set himself back down on the bed and opened the book, holding it in a way that the flame in the brazier was sure to illuminate the inside. Come on, sit down with me. What is that? Shenna said, climbing onto the bed beside Gareth. Ancient tales told for children, Gareth said. My uncle taught me how to read with this book when I was young. I think I can do the same for you. He sounded confident. Shenna leaned up against Gareth, sliding her arms around his torso and resting her chin on his shoulder. Very well, Magister Gareth. Your pupil awaits her first lesson. Gareth opened the book to the start of the very first story. Here the title page bore a magnificent, full-color illustration of a man standing atop a small hill inside a forest with a crowd of animals circled around him. How the first man came to be, Gareth read slowly, tracing his finger along a line of ornate text beneath the picture. You see this symbol here? Gareth pointed. This means man. And this one right next to it, that means first. The tale proper began on the next page, where more intricate illustrations in the margins told the story without the text. In the beginning, the four spirits that lived upon the moon looked down upon the young world with its deep forests, broad deserts, vast oceans, clear skies, and majestic mountains, and they lamented that it was devoid of any living thing. And so the four spirits decided to create creatures to inhabit this new world. They made fish to dart through the shallows and the depths, birds to soar the skies and ride the winds, crawling lizards and snakes to bask in the desert heat, and all manner of creatures to walk the green lands. And yet, with time, the spirits grew frustrated with their creations, for as these creatures roamed the face of the earth, they began to quarrel and tyrannize each other. Tigers and lions chased down the smaller creatures that were content to live on grass. Birds swooped down from the heights and plucked fish from the waters, and swarms of biting and stinging insects roved the land, tormenting all in their path. As the four spirits looked down from their dwelling place on the palaces of the moon, they knew that something had to be done to set things in balance once again. And so the spirits resolved to make one last creature, one that would reign over all the others. And thus was man first conceived in the thoughts of the spirits. Long did they labor in crafting him, and when he was finished, the four spirits summoned all creatures to meet their new masters. However, when the creatures of the land, sea, and sky looked upon this new beast that was to be their sovereign liege lord, they laughed. Mighty Bear boasted that he could snap man in half with a single stroke of his paw. Nimble Deer boasted that he could easily outrun this creature and vanish into the forest depths. Birds and fish both boasted that any creature that could not fly or swim as they did had no claim to dominion over the skies or the seas. And in that moment, the four spirits began to doubt themselves. For it seems they had neglected to bless man with the same gifts as those creatures they were intended to be his subjects. It was then that wise Crow silenced the chorus of beasts with a single shrill cry. "Fools you are," he said. "True, in many respects our gifts are greater. Bear is mightier of arm, deer is fleeter of step, and birds and fish may soar or dive beyond his grasp. But see, the four spirits have given him the greatest gift of all, and that is knowledge, wisdom, and the cunning makings of his hand. Behold how he shapes wood and stone to fashion weapons to slay great beasts, or to strike far at those who think to flee beyond his reach. Neither are birds or fish safe from him, for snares he shall set and bait, and nets he shall weave and cast into the waters. Even plants obey him, for see how he turns the soil to order the growing of all things according to his design. Truly, I say, this creature man shall yet be lord over us all." And at this admonishment the great host of beasts was humbled, and the four spirits said to Crow, "Because you have spoken such wise words, you shall be known hereafter as Athanasius." And all the creatures of land, sea, and sky bowed their heads in reverence to their new master. As the story went on, Gareth would pause every few lines or so and point out a particular symbol or groups of symbols and explain them to Shenna. "This here represents beast," he would say, or "this combination of symbols makes these sounds," or "when this symbol is modified with that extra mark, it means this." Shenna raised questions of her own as well. She asked why sometimes words were written out of sequence, or why certain words were represented with a single syllable and others needed a whole string of symbols. Gareth answered her questions as best he could, though most of the time the answer was simply, "Because that's the way it is." Gareth took particular delight in explaining the crow's name at the end of the tale. "You see here how it's written with these two characters?" he pointed out. "They mean hidden wisdom and to keep. So when you put them together, they mean keeper of hidden wisdom. But the really clever thing is this. If we were speaking the old tongue, these symbols would be read as Athan and Asios. So put them together, Athanasius." Shenna nodded along to the explanation. "So the name has a second meaning?" "Exactly," Gareth said. "That is what we call a true name. When you write someone's name using not sounds, but with the older symbols that have this extra layer of meaning to them." "It sounds complicated," Shenna remarked. "It only sounds that way because you don't know how it works yet," Gareth said with another smile. "Well, how about it? Feel like another story?" The next tale told of two children who left their homes to seek the deepest secrets of magic. As they wandered the trackless wilderness, they were pursued by forces of the wicked sorcerer Kordesh, who sought to use children in a spell to make himself immortal. The children evaded Kordesh's minions easily enough, but eventually they were captured and imprisoned in the sorcerer's dungeons. But when all seemed lost, Athanasius the wise crow came to them and revealed Kordesh's greatest weakness, that he could not abide the light of the sun. And so when Kordesh came to perform the ritual of sacrifice to make himself immortal, the children flattered him and begged him to explain the ritual in great detail. And being arrogant, Kordesh could not help but flaunt his knowledge of magic and his power over all things. Sure enough, dawn broke before he could begin the ritual, and Kordesh was defeated and driven away into the wastelands. And the children returned home, now with the knowledge of magic. More stories followed, cunning tales of heroes on great sweeping adventures across strange and wonderful lands. Some characters appeared across multiple tales, like Athanasius the Wise Crow and the child-snatching sorcerer Cordesh, who seemed to be his nemesis. Gareth's explanations continued, of course, and by the third or fourth tale, he began to suggest that Shenna read a line here and there. She struggled at first, but with Gareth's gentle help, Shenna grew more and more confident in her ability. As they finished the last story of the evening, the curtains rustled softly, and Shenna looked up to see her crow swoop across the room to land on her outstretched arm with another songberry in its beak. "Another one? How sweet," Shenna said, taking the berry and popping it into her mouth. "Is that a friend of yours?" Gareth chuckled. "Yes, something like that," Shenna said, gently stroking the crow's head. "Oh, this is Gareth! You know the one I was telling you about before. Say hello to Gareth." As soon as Shenna mentioned Gareth, the crow's head swiveled about to stare directly at the boy. The creature's gaze did not waver for an instant. It didn't even cock its head from side to side as it did with Shenna. This was probably the closest thing to a glare that the crow could manage. If Gareth had been wearing any feathers, Shenna suspected the crow would have already pecked him to pieces. "That's a good boy," Gareth said, carefully stroking the feathered side of the bird's head. "What's his name?" Shenna blinked. All this time, and it hadn't ever occurred to her to think up a name for her little companion. "I don't know yet," Shenna shrugged, "but I'm sure I can come up with something." Soon after, the two of them said their farewells, and Shenna slipped out of Gareth's room with her crow perched atop her shoulder. As she made her way back to the girls' dormitory, she considered what sort of a name might fit a crow. She didn't really know where to start. She wasn't sure that it even was a crow and not a rook, a raven, a jackdaw, or some other black-plumed fowl. Shenna didn't even know for sure whether it was a boy or a girl. Then again, was a name even necessary? Wild animals didn't bother with such silly things as names. Besides, Shenna and her crow recognized each other easily enough. There surely couldn't be another half-dead bird like hers in all the world. No, it wasn't right. This crow was a treasured friend and companion, and Shenna would not let the poor thing go another moment without a suitable and dignified name. "I have thought of a name for you," Shenna declared as she crossed the threshold back into her chamber. "You shall be known as Athanasius, like the wise crow from the ancient tales." The violet flame danced happily in the crow's eye socket. Yes, that was a good name. Athanasius the Wise Crow, keeper of hidden wisdom and bringer of songberries. And that's that.
I'm always a fan of the lore in lore giving stuff. It's always fascinating.
I just like Carl's voice. You do your character justice.
Thank you.
So, I'm going to ask a Nordish.
Is to be concealed? No, that's not a biblical allegory.
Oh.
I mean, I got some allegory in there, but that's not one of it.
I'm going to ask a Nordish question. Is this script like a logographic script, or is it like partly logographic, partly phonetic, kind of like ancient Egyptian or Sumerian or something like that?
Yeah, that's the way. Part logographs, part phonetics.
Is it a syllabary or an alphabet?
It's anything. It's very much like an ad hoc mess. You know, this is like something that has never been reformed. You know, there's been no attempt to actually make any sort of order out of it. It is, some things are logographic, some things are syllables, some things are consonants or vowels. Some characters are just modifiers to other characters. You know, it's meant to be very, very complicated. And in a way, that's kind of the point. Because if
How
it
many-
was simple, anyone could learn it.
Ah, yes, that's very wise. How many characters are there?
A lot.
Like in the thousands or like the hundreds?
Probably like 1,000.
Oh, wow.
I mean, most of them would be like the logographic characters. And a lot of those would be like very, very specific things, like proper nouns.
Do you have
But
a
like, for
language?
example, like this is the first time we really explain the true name. That's when, if you remember, when I introduced Elira El Shandaval 4 Jewels, that would be her true name. So you would write out Elira using the symbols for 4 jewels. And like if you use the right symbols, particularly, that would spell phonetically her name, Elira.
Cool. Do you have her? Do you have the language figured out, like grammar and all that stuff?
I've got some notes kicking around, but I'm probably not gonna like craft a canon explanation. I mean, you know, the last thing I want to do is give my readers homework. You know.
So maybe a sketchlang, and yeah, the myths were cool too.
Yeah. You know, that's one of the great things about setting a part of your story in a school. You know, the character is very much learning the world along with the reader. You know.
Yeah, I've had a bit of that in my novel early on.
Yeah. So yeah.
Alrighty. I don't have any other thoughts. It seems pretty straightforward. I like where it's going. I'm intrigued to see what Shenna gets up to in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I will say.
Magic. Okay, go for it.
Oh, sorry. I'm just making a joke. You're making a serious thing, so you can finish the serious thing, and then I can make the joke.
I was just saying I'm interested to see where Shenna goes in terms of her arc as she goes more into the school stuff.
Yeah. Well, all I was going to say was that magical mores have gone downhill since my day. This would never have been tolerated back then. You'd been turned to stone and then crushed to dust.
I know. Sneaking into the boys' dormitory. Have you no shame, girl?
That's just
Have
revolting.
you no shame?
Kill it dead.
Shame is dead along with honor.
But I will see what I can do.
Let's go with that, actually. Yeah, that works.
Sorry, that's another Stormlight reference. Sorry, you lot.
All right. So, which ones? May I ask why children's tales will be written in such high language? Because, because Gareth is nobility. So it's expected that, you know, nobility would read a high language. You know.
None of that trashy Communist Manifesto stuff.
I know. I wonder what Yannick kid is doing up to.
Well, in my flashback thing, he starts communism and founds Yannickism or something like that, and he gets put to death.
Yeah, I know.
Nexism.
Yeah, and eventually something else amusing will happen. I've not had time to carry on with that lately, but I'll see what I can do, so to speak.
Well, I will say this: Yannick is very much coming back, in a way. That will. Well, I probably said too much in that regard, so we'll have to leave it there.
Oh, will he and Gareth have a screaming rivalry over her?
I probably shouldn't say.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably.
I think we've discussed this subject for long enough. Balerion, did you have something you wanted to share with us?
Yes, but I can't do it really now because I'm eating.
Very well then, Captain Commander. Would you help us out then?
Sure. I can do that. Allow me to pull up the Battle of the Seven Suns. This is going to be... We're reaching the final pieces of the battle and kind of almost battle, which I'm very excited about. Because for me, I'm very, very happy with how this turned out in terms of the overall arc of the story and where things went, as well as kind of just trying to kind of portray some of the gritty realism of what a power struggle using dragons would look like, as well as just kind of not really worrying about portraying an empire as thinking they're in the right when in reality, no, they're pretty bad. They're, or at least they're willing to do bad things in order to keep what they perceive as Eva's order, as opposed to allowing rebellions. And currently, we have Hera has seen a strange, what seems to be time traveling girl, based on the fact that she said, used the analogy of a glass cannon, something that does not exist yet, and has given her quite a bit of new power. So that's and one of the enemy dragons has just attacked Hera and has bathed her in fire. And that's where we ended the last chapter, after she went on a wild charge at the enemy. Okay. Ergast let out a roar as the dragon enveloped Hera in fire, then leaped off the edge and thundered onto the field, straight at the Sitharis lines. Stunned at what he was seeing, Torash barely registered the entire orc army preparing to rush forward. Borihar gathering all the human army and rather allying them for a full rush. Shaking himself out of his shock, Torash pulled his mind to the moment and gestured to the flag girl. "Signal a full attack," he growled, then raised his axe toward the orcs. "Gargan! Bargarunar!" As one, his people raised their weapons and bellowed as they began to charge. As his people ran forward all around him, Torash leaped off the hill and onto the ground, his legs absorbing the shock impact as he joined the mad dash. Humans and orcs together charged. Both races united in fury. Hera! 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 The call went up as the army flooded across the field. The dragon halted its barrage and turned toward them, but just as it did, the flames cleared to reveal Hera still standing in the midst. Torash halted in amazement, even as the army followed suit. Fire began to circle Hera, her regular silver and black armor transformed to red and black right before his eyes. Shrieking in rage, the purple dragon came around for another attack. At that distance, the fire was so hot that Torash had to cover his eyes. But this time, as the fire struck, it wrapped around Hera instead of engulfing her. Unable to keep his vision away, Torash stared as the fire split into dozens of tiny tendrils before being absorbed into a set of red markings that ran down her face and shone through her armor like the metal was opaque cloth. The dragon screamed and was about to unleash another blast of fire, but Hera raised her sword and swung it down. A curved arc of hardened fire blasted from dark fire, the ancient blade forged from the bones of a demon blazing with a negative light. Erisa had only time to cover her face as the blade of fire struck her dragon hard in the chest and face. However, she was still in Ellen Sisyphan's mind when the fire slammed into him. Her own eyes suddenly seared as if a hot poker had been driven directly into her face, as his eye and half his face were partially melted by the intense heat. Screaming, she pressed her hand to her eye as the pain burned into her face, trying to relieve some of the suffering as her own pain and Sisyphant's began and feeding in on each other, doubling and redoubling an infinite loop, shrieking so hard that Erissa's eardrums began bleeding from the force of the screams. Sisyphant fled the field, and she couldn't bring herself to care. The only thing was in her mind was the pain and a desperate need to escape it. Her mind began latching onto as many familiar minds as possible, trying to find relief, only to get pushed out. She felt the other two dragon riders and tried to call out to them, but her pain made everything incomprehensible. Screaming, Erissa and Sisyphant fled the field in a mad flight. Hera imagined that this must be what it felt like to be a dragon as she turned toward the approaching Mammoks. She had felt truly powerful as she turned her sword over in her hands so that the tip was pointed downward. In one fluid motion, she dropped to one knee, slamming Darkfire's blade down into the ground, using the knowledge that the girl had placed inside her mind. Twin lines of fire spread out to either side of her, as the Mammoks charged, dual blades of fire cutting the battlefield in two. Just as the giant beasts were about to attack, a wall of flame burst from the two lions, then raced forward, looking at the legs of the first rank of animals. The horrible sounds of the Mammoks roaring in pain and fear filled the air, drowning out the crackling of the flames. In unison, the animals turned and ran, crashing into the ranks behind them, which in turn set up a chain reaction that caused the rest of the Mammoks to start stampeding into the Sitharis infantry, causing the formation to scatter. "Be careful," the voice in her head whispered. "There's only so much power that I can give you now that one of the dragons is gone, and it will run out very soon. But I need you to use the weapon as much as possible. There's one more thing that I can do in order to ensure that everything goes right." Thinking quickly, Hera dissolved the flames and stood up, clutching her sword in her hand. All around them were dead and dying Mammoks. Several of them had their tusks embedded in each other. Others were on their sides, lowing in pain, and still more were on fire, stampeding through the enemy ranks. Eventually, they would be brought down, but until then, they would do a great deal of damage. Hera quickly surveyed the devastation and made a snap decision. The enemy was scattering, but soon they would start regrouping. Soon. "Torash, prepare to charge," she raised her sword. "We need to prevent the enemy army from regrouping enough to surround us." "It shall be done." Torash nodded to her, then blew on his horn. Urgast growled eagerly as he set himself to charge, licking the flat of his blade with a long black tongue. "This shall be a battle song that shall be sung for generations to come," he growled, hefting the enormous brutal weapon. Hera steeled herself and took Darkfire in both hands, setting herself to run forward. "Charge!" she yelled, raising her sword and sending a stream of fire into the air as a signal to the rest of the army. Then she was running out in front of everyone, despite the fact that her legs were shorter than most everyone else in the army. Not even the orcs could keep up with her. Screaming in exhilaration, Hera swung her sword in a wide arc. A wave of fire incinerated the first few ranks in front of her, the only partially formed up troops dying in the raging inferno of her fury. Eyes wide, Hera crashed into the gap and started cutting her way through. Urgast felt the familiar battle rage building inside him, an old friend that had gotten him through over a dozen battles pounding in his chest. Roaring uncontrollably, Urgast began swinging his sword around wildly as he crashed into the Sitharis infantry, blood spraying across his armor. The Mammoks crashed around the battlefield, several of them on fire, stumping friend and foe alike with equal impartiality. One of the beasts attempted to charge to the Numenorians' ranks, but the men quickly leaped aside and used their spears to redirect the animals into the press of the Sitharis. However, due to the nature of the situation, the expertly trained orc pikemen were forced to break their formations in order to direct the Mammoks into the enemy forces, allowing the Sitharis infantry to move and attack them. In close quarters, the long pikes became hindrances rather than advantages. Urgast growled and turned his attention away from the giant beast, just as a pair of enemy cavalry oarsmen rode toward them. With a growl, Torash ran between them, the scimitar coming out of his sheath in one fluid motion. Teeth bared, Urgast's old friend slammed his shoulder into one of the horse, at the same time knocking the enemy's sword out of his fist. Growling, he spun and iced off the oncoming horse's leg before hacking off the rider's sword hand. "Show off!" Urgast yelled at his friend as Torash ran up beside him, hefting his blood-soaked axe and curved sword in his hands. Like the impudent pup he was, the younger orc grinned and rushed forward. Hera rushed forward in front of them, her fiery sword carving a path of destruction worthy of any Gorzat Ars Nul. Urgast felt pride at seeing his charge do well. Growling, he and Torash fought as they always had, side by side with Aemon's blood, to whatever end. Despite the pressure of the Numenorian soldiers, the Sithar's troops quickly began reforming their lines and solidifying their position. The humans and orcs began locking their shields and pushed against the Sithar's troops, the superior numbers of the enemy forces holding out despite the strength and ferocity of the orcs. Snarling, Urgast crashed into a group of Sithar's troops, then started slashing through them with his sword, followed closely by Torash. The Karsha Bow began pushing in, and on the two orcs, even as their forces began pushing forward. Blood fountained from stumps and other gruesome injuries on both sides. The Sithar's troops using groups of troops in order and overwhelm the much larger orcs, only to lose large portions of their soldiers as the orcs kept on slashing even after taking serious damage. Urgast ignored his brethren, focused only on keeping his charge alive. She seemed to be doing a good enough job on his own, but he and Torash kept on either side of her, cutting down anything that attempted to come in from the sides. Hera fought hard to keep the enemy on the back foot. Dark fire blazed in her hand as she swung wildly, swords and armor melting as they came into contact with the fiery weapon. Down and down the sword swung, and each time it did, a hunk of molten metal fell to the ground, followed by a pile of ruined, burning flesh. Growling, she burned a trail through her enemy's ranks, her shadows, Torash and Urgast on her flanks, defending her against any attacks from the side. A tall Sitharian man ran to her and at her, a chainmail veil and neck guard made of the finest steel, his wedge-shaped sword swinging wildly. "Tyrant!" he roared as he swung for her, but Hera's sword slammed into his wedge-shaped blade with just as much force. With a sizzling hiss, the blade melted to slag, causing the man to drop it, screaming and wringing his hands. With a hesitation, Hera drove her sword through his chest, setting a blaze within seconds. Then she felt it. The intense fire she'd been drawing from faded to a comfortable warmth. Exhaustion abruptly hit her like a blow to the stomach, causing her to drop to her knees. Another Sitharis man came at her, sword raised to strike at her neck. She managed to land a strike on his leg. Darkfire's indestructible legs airing through flesh and bone as easily through cloth, but her energy was still drained. The man fell to the ground, screaming, clutching the gushing stump that remained of his leg. Snarling, she shoved the blade into his chest, killing him instantly. Yelling, a green-clad soldier swung his sword at her, but Hera deflected via her upraised sword, then swung Darkfire in an overhand blow that slashed through the man's armor and sent him through the ground, blood spraying in her face. Grunting, Hera pushed herself to her feet and started swinging wildly, trying to keep them at bay, but the Sitharis were out for blood. An entire group of the silk and chainmail-clad enemy rushed toward her, spears extended. Gritting her teeth, Hera raised her sword, preparing to sell her life as dearly as possible. Before she got the chance, Torash and Urgast rushed into the midst of the enemy, their own dragonfire weapons searing through the enemy's spears before hacking off heads and arms. The rest of her guards swarmed around her, pulling her toward the back ranks, prevent the enemy from getting at her, but that left Torash and Urgast isolated in the front ranks. Shaking her head, Hera tried to say something, but anything to make them stop so that she could direct the battle, but her mind felt hazy and woozy. Blinking, she looked down at herself to find that she had several cuts and slashes on the unprotected bits where her armor didn't protect her. "You've lost a lot of blood, my lady," one of the men said once she'd been carried to the middle of the army, far from the front lines. "How bad?" Hera asked, The practices, the field medic began wrapping her injuries with antiseptic soap bandages. Your armor protected you from the worst of it, he said matter-of-factly. I've never seen anything like what you did. It was like seeing Megara come again with judgment in her hand. Only considerably shorter. Hera forced a smile to cover the wince as he bounded up a particularly bad cut on her leg. Her smile faded as she looked around the battlefield. Despite how much damage they dealt to the Sitharis troops, they still outnumbered them 2-1. And that number was fluctuating due to the Mammoks running around. Some of them had died, others had run off with their cargo of archers and spearmen, and a few others were still on the battlefield unharmed. We're losing, Hera muttered, looking around for the girl who had given her those powers. She was nowhere to be found. And that will conclude it for today.
Exciting stuff.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's always a good thing to jump around multiple perspectives when doing a battle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I quite enjoy like jumping around through various different perspectives. It's always it's always one of my favorite things to do, is especially when like you have such a big, like, what is probably like, I think like probably like my biggest battle to date, especially like in terms of length. I don't know about scale, since the scale of the end of Lost Legion was pretty huge. But I did try my best to make this battle as engaging as possible, because the battle can get kind of boring unless you do some very clever how do I say it? Very clever shifting of perspectives around, as well as keep the beats of the battle shifting constantly.
Yeah, I move around with perspectives too. Although in my case, it's more politics than battles, because I don't really do battles very well. So I move from the good guys to the bad guys. From one good guy to a different good guy. When I say bad guy, I should probably say antagonist. I guess they're bad guys, but
yeah, same difference.
Yeah, I've been finding it real difficult to keep with only one perspective. I've very strongly limited myself to one perspective through the Waters of Akra, and there are some times when I try to press against that, but I've managed to keep myself locked down in that regard.
Imagine a crow perspective. I said, imagine a crow perspective.
I imagine that would be very interesting.
I think Attack on Titan actually did that once.
Who did?
Attack on Titan.
Yeah, well, there are novels where the characters are rabbits. There's a novel where the characters are moles. I imagine it could be one with crows.
Yeah, you're writing one of those.
Oh, that one. Well, I didn't exactly write it, but yes.
Well, it's like imitation is like the most sincere form of flattery, which is like so bourgeois.
Yeah, really bourgeois. Yeah, and sometime I must get back to the flash fic.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I'll get more time next week.
Yeah, I remember one story we read in one book we read in English class in middle school that was told from the perspective of a family of dolphins.
That could be cool or stupid, depending.
Yeah.
Dolphins are one of the few species that is capable of raping humans.
No
Yeah.
comment.
I know.
Absolute dicks.
Yep.
No comment, I said.
What can you do? Alrighty, Balerion, you have the floor.
I'm actually not quite ready yet now either. Maybe in a quarter hour I'll be ready. What about the malt chapter?
We already read it.
Oh, you would have. Oh dear. Well, I could try reading with my mouth full. That might be a little bit off-putting, but I could try doing that.
Sorry, I just have to. In about 30 minutes, I have my plasma donation. So
I think I did your plasma donation already.
I shifted it so that we could start a little bit early, so that I didn't have to worry, because usually I'm waiting in line for 40 minutes, and then an hour and then another 40.
Oh, then we could have done it at 3 then. We could have done it at 1 p.m. then. That would have been much better from my point of view.
Okay.
Oh well.
Okay.
Yeah. The general rule, 1 p.m. for reading is better from my point of view, because it's not quite the same thing when you're reading from when you're reading for a continuous length of time. It's not the same time as joining a bunch of people commenting on a film or discussing a book or whatever. So half a moment, I'll be right with you. I need to grab some more of my lunch. I'll have to interrupt every now and then.
That's perfectly okay. Take your time. I'm just a little bit tired, but that's good because it'll force me to go to bed early tonight, and hopefully I get more than 5 hours of sleep before my body just wakes me up.
Well, you'll be tired from your plasma donation.
I actually don't really get very tired from plasma donations for whatever reason. I don't know why. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm not sure. I think like with this one, it was a lot of like battle, kind of like the press. A lot of it was, and I haven't really gotten to like kind of the meatier part of the battle. I'm kind of like, I guess if we're using a sandwich analogy, we've gotten the sourdough beginning of the battle, then we kind of get a little bit of cheese and then some meat, and now we're in a little bit of cheese before we get into some more meat.
Okay. Charles Colton says, "You're okay. You seem to say a lot," and that reminds me that you also have a tendency to say "like" a lot, which reminds me. This isn't hopefully this is amusing and not like obnoxious, but there was a Mad Magazine comic back in the day about people with hang-ups, and this chap says, "I've got like this really like bad like hang-up, man," and someone says, "What's your really bad hang-up?" And he says, "I like saying like." So hopefully that's amazing, not obnoxious.
Oh, I think it's funny.
Everyone has those tics. I also technically have them, though I use so many of the normal tics that nobody notices until I tell them to pay attention.
Yeah.
It's strange.
Yeah, I'm sure I have my own too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what. Oh. That's the one when you say it's strange, that just reminds me of Helena Bonham Carter as Morgan Le Fay in the Merlin miniseries from 1997.
Are we back to that again?
Different miniseries.
Oh, okay, good.
It's a different one. There have been 2 Merlin miniseries. Well, one was not a miniseries; it was a full series. One had Rita Skeeter in it from Harry Potter as evil Queen Mab, and Lena Headey Cersei Lannister as Guinevere,
Oh, that'd be good.
and Sam Neill from Jurassic Park as Merlin.
Okay, there's also another series. I don't know if it's a mini series or a full series. It's from '79. Boy Merlin.
I think there's actually a book series called The Young Merlin. I read like the first half of the first book, and then I just kind of gave up because I'm more of an audiobook reader than a reader. Like I don't really like log information when I read as well.
That's my exact opposite problem.
Really?
Yeah, I can't. Audiobooks are my hell.
Really?
Well, audiobooks are. I like audiobooks if you've already read the book. I'm not sure how well they would do for me if I hadn't read the book already. Because I like to actually read, like visually read things. But with the book club, we use audiobooks for the Song of Ice and Fire series, and I like doing it that way.
I need to see the words to get an image in my head. Otherwise, this is going past me. My mind eventually just dulls.
Yeah, that's how my mind works. So, this is the serious. Sorry.
Oh, I just said, oh, interesting. Go for it.
Okay, this is the serious novel again. You may remember that the nasty emperor killed their parents, their fathers anyway, and we're in the aftermath stage of all that. And last time we were with the eldest son. Oh, I need to turn it down. Can you hear my radio? I probably need to turn it down.
We can hear it, but it's fine. I was liking it.
Okay, good. Half a moment, I'll be right back.
Classicals and alt mash.
Saturday afternoon here, returning to the beginnings of German romanticism in music with the overture to Carl Maria Weber's ghost story opera, Ariadne. The opera's first production was October.
Okay, so this is the aftermath. So, a few weeks later, pardon me, Akwekwe, Mpu'u, and the Yaji, that is the priest, Malala were having another of their meetings, which none of them seemed much to enjoy. If one is going to hatch evil plots, one should at least have fun doing it. But clearly they had never heard this wisdom. No one liked the Yaji because he's always spoiling people's fun with hypocritical pseudo-pieties. No one liked Ekwekwe because he was a, boring, depraved, and stupid tyrant. And no one liked Mpu'u because he was cleverer than they were. Not that being cleverer than Ekwekwe was a terribly impressive accomplishment. So there they were once again in the vestibule of Ekwekwe's bedchamber. Exalted would rather have been with his Saranjis and a pair of, oh God, this is disgusting, and a pair of dogs he'd recently ordered for less than decent purposes. They now had to deal with the consequences of the political murder of Counts Pilamar and Garawala. Just as Mpu'u and Malala had feared. For Burunu and Umaran's request for the bodies of the disgraced aristocrats had reached the court, and Exalted was not pleased. On top of which, the tapestry in the vestibule to the emperor's chamber still had hardly any spun jewelry, and on top of that, it was nowhere near pornographic enough. And Exalted's love, or lust life, had been boring for a whole 12 minutes before the meeting. He didn't remember much before that. Fools! Blustered Exalted as he flipped through some obscene pictures. And Exalted, I thought they were loyal. Well, they do have to make at least some vague pretense of satisfying the people, Exalted, said Mpu'u. It's revolting, it's disgusting, I know. It would be easier if anyone who had a thought that was even slightly not in accordance with Exalted will would just die instantly. But Naja didn't make the world like that. Pardon me? He already could hardly wait for the meeting to be over, and it had just begun. He had of late begun calling the room the dungeon, and felt about these meetings more or less as a penance for having been born, probably, too exalted. Why did he have to wait so long to be exalted himself? Who cares about the people, screamed the Emperor, spewing all over Exalted couch. Who cares? The bodies should be fed to the wolves, to the vultures, to the dung beetles. That's bad form, though, said Mpu'u, tapping his fingers distractedly. Pardon me. Pardon me. Doubly pardon me. Even emperors need to do things Jai Shah or comme il faut. Pardon me. It's commendable to honor the dead, agreed Malala Ama, staring nervously in front of him. He was trying to look grave, but it was difficult when everywhere we looked there were pornographic bas-reliefs. It is written in the war, Ahmad. Oh God. Shirihuyu Rayamaya Angnai. Rayamayamu An Janjit Yahidam, which I think means let the living honor the dead, for they too will die someday. And it is, of course, especially commendable if they're nobles, whose name will endure forever, as the poet tells us. It's not clear which poet the Yaji had in mind. Perhaps an anonymous epic poem about the probably legendary Turanian king Odira. Who knows? Pardon me. In fact, there's just a standing part of me, just assume I'm saying pardon me every couple of minutes during this. It'll save time. They're traitors! Traitors! Wheezed Ikwekwe. Their names are dung! They should be tossed down the privy! Mpu'u rolled his eyes. He had long since lost whatever minuscule interest he might have ever had in Exalted's irrational antipathies. Half a moment. The Yaji frowned and looked grave. Probably he was still trying to avoid staring at the pornography. It was a bit much even for him. Yes, but even so, he murmured. If they were peasants, I'd be all for the vultures, sighed Mpu'u, taking a pinch of waka'a in order to stay awake. For starters, it would mean we could finally drop this ineffably boring subject. And it isn't as if their opinion much mattered. But nobility, and high nobility at that, traitors! I want them defiled! Exalted tried to raise himself up from the couch in a rage, failed, and sank back down in an enervated sort of way. Exalted I alone decide what's noble, and they aren't. The nobility might feel a bit differently about it, muttered the prince. He half unconsciously began inching his way towards the exit. The laws lay down different types of funerals with different degrees of honor, put in the Yaji. I believe there's a right, I forgot his voice, but anyway. I believe there's a right for dishonored high noble. It comes from Chugga like so much else, but still, it would allow for a decent funeral while at the same time recognizing their fault. Make sure they throw dung at the corpses, yelled a Kwekwe, slightly less lividly. Probably even he was losing interest in his post-mortem vendetta and wanted to hop over to the Berusa. Not that he was physically capable of hopping. I wish I could be there, but too much to do here. Mainly eating, drinking, drugs, and what passed for coupling. The Yaji sighed. Why does Exalted hate them so much? He asked in a piteous tone as he fiddled with his sacred necklace. Does there have to be a reason? Said Impu'u with more than a touch of sarcasm. Exalted does it because he does. It is Exalted my will, said the Emperor. Throw dung. Oh, very well, Exalted. Impu'u rolled his eyes again. We'll put it into the instructions, just so I can get out of here. The floor felt even more uncomfortable than usual, and the room's aesthetic was trashy. They don't even do pornography right around here, he thought. And get Margaret and Barama, added Ekwekwe, largely out of habit. And where are the rubies on this tapestry? I Exalted ordered them years ago. We're still trying to raise the money, Exalted. No, I'm sorry. We're still trying to raise the money, Exalted, said Malala Amma, still fiddling with his necklace. The populace are not, alas, are as grateful for Exalted protection as one would wish. And even if there were, precious stones are still expensive, which is why we call them precious, said Impu'u, already beginning to crawl backwards out of the room. Soak the peasantry, said Ekwekwe. You're meant to know how to do these things, and now get out of here. Exalted, I'm off to the Barusa. Order my bearers to take me there at once. He twitched lustfully and began slobbering. Impu'u and Malala Amma were only too happy to comply. We should stop bringing things to Exalted's attention, murmured the prince as they exited. It's a waste of time. The Yaji said nothing, but looked grieved as he usually did when dealing with anyone more powerful than he was. As soon as he reached the Saranjis, he could sing a different tune, and did. And that will do for now.
Classical music is very nice.
The classical music is better than the actual story. Well, it actually did.
really sets the ambiance. You know, it's the sort of thing one would expect to find perfuming the air in the chambers of a mad emperor.
Yes.
Yeah, some Pornoff is my nephew's name. You may have, I forgot to tell you that Pornoff was actually my nephew's name.
I kind of want to ask the
that
radio.
anyway?
I want to know what is playing right now.
That's a variations on a tune called La Folia, or Madness. I think it's by Vivaldi.
What of madness?
Was that intentional or was it a happy coincidence?
That's a coincidence. This is just the radio.
How come the radio is on, is my question.
I usually have the radio on, and I did mention, but someone said they were liking it, so I did ask, should I turn it down, but someone said they liked it, so I just kept it on the whole time.
Yes, I was when he said I liked it because classical music is great and it fits.
Well, there are worse things.
Mhm.
Nice.
No, it's
Yes.
better than the street party that has materialized outside my house.
I
Oh
can't
God,
hear
yes.
that for whatever reason.
So apart from the radio, did anything from the actual story register?
It's kind of a lot of it is basically the people are trying to actually steer the insane emperor into not being completely stupid.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, I do get the sense that a lot of the narrative going on is very much cleaning up after the execution of the two disgraced nobles.
Yep, because things do have consequences.
Hmm. Yes, that they do.
If you annoy the family, the people belong to a powerful nobility, something will happen.
Hmm. Yeah, I just recently was reminded of a very interesting word, a kakistocracy.
Oh, I
That
love
is
that word.
a government by the least qualified.
Oh yeah, the government by the worst.
Yeah. Hmm.
And kakistos worse.
Exactly.
Kaka apparently the kakos means bad in Greek, but apparently it comes from something meaning poo-poo.
I believe it.
So, and yes, I do have a thing going on in the background. Yes, I do have a thing going on in the background.
Hmm. Yeah, I was real worried that people were gonna hear the heavy thumping Spanish music coming in outside my window. But I guess no. Classical music works just fine.
Mhm. Maybe
Yeah,
I
because it's
figured it out.
classical.
Yeah, there's a reason why it's classical. This has survived 300 years.
Yeah, I
You
don't
can
know.
easily read any book
Maybe after
with it.
300 years, these people will be considered classical music. And
No.
maybe during that time, kids will be complaining about, oh, this old stuff on the radio. Come on, put something modern on.
Okay,
I
they
would
already do for classical.
I wouldn't mind if they did that for rap. To be perfectly frank,
Somebody
play
get
some.
rid of rap, please.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, there's only three kinds of music: classical, prog, and everything else.
The
Okay,
fuck is Prague?
progressive rock.
Yeah, prog rock, prog metal. You know, Yes, Dream Theater, Symphony X, that sort of thing.
I think I've heard of Yes. I'm not sure about the other ones.
But yeah,
That's all, folks.
okay.
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, this has certainly been an intro and a good stream. I like how it's gone quite a bit. I'm excited to do next week. Next week is going to be fairly well planned, I think. We have our Legend of the Seeker Season 1 roundtable discussion. Then we have Balerion's literature survey on Tuesday,
That's on my channel.
which is on his channel. Go check it out. On Tuesday, we will also be watching The Force Awakens.
Oh, that'll be a riot.
Oh joy.
Yes, oh joy.
I can hardly wait.
Oh, go for it. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm a sequel defender, right?
That's an impressive feat, considering you've never seen them.
Well,
Don't-
I'm clairvoyant.
Don't worry. If he is, the slaughter will be much more fun.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
I'll have to work out times and see when our friends in Europe want to watch it, or if they do want to participate. We'll see.
By the way, consider inviting Replica for maybe not for the watching, but for the actual streams where we talk about it. That'll be funny.
Well,
I'll let him on for like very briefly, I imagine.
like at the end or something. I think he hates the sequels though. That was
Yes, he does.
he
yeah,
does.
he hates them way more than any of us do.
Oh,
I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. I just think he has it to the almost irrational level where he's like everything is absolutely worse than this.
Well, except for the Transformers movies. For whatever reason, he thinks that the Transformers movies aren't bad.
and he likes the prequels. Well, I like the prequels too. To be fair, no
I
fun.
feel like the
Prequels are
prequels had
underrated.
something.
The
I'm not gonna
prequels were
get
very
into
much
this.
a victim of their time.
I
Yeah.
don't want to get into it because the last time I brought this up, Dio from fucking EFAP, the server, fucking wrecked my ass.
Well, I doubt whoever this chap is, I doubt he's watching this.
Oh, I doubt it, but it's just like, I don't know, I never asked this.
Yeah. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, I gotta get going. I will see you guys later.
Have a riot.